We'll bring you visuals of Air Force One with President Donald Trump and the US delegation, which has now landed at Singapore's Changi Airport ahead of that much anticipated historic summit that the US president will have with the North Korean leader, Chairman Kim Jong Un. Air Force One just landing at Changi Airport, and those are live pictures that you're seeing of the aircraft as President Trump is about to get off along with his delegation. Kim Jong Un has arrived in Singapore a few hours earlier. He's already had a meeting, in fact, with his host, the Prime Minister of Singapore, and the US President Donald Trump and his delegation have also arrived in Singapore at the Changi Airport, the Paya Lebar military base in Singapore, where Air Force One has landed. President Trump leaving the G7 summit in Canada early before the complete communique was in fact issued by all the other leaders. He addressed the press briefly before leaving Canada for Singapore, and you're seeing pictures there of his arrival in Singapore. The summit is scheduled for Tuesday. It is believed that the summit between US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un will take place at 9 a.m. local time in Singapore. A Capella Resort on the Sentosa Island has been chosen as the venue for that summit. In the day ahead, between when the two leaders meet, it is expected that the delegations of the two countries will probably meet to pave the way for the summit meeting between the two leaders. The first meeting between a sitting US president and a North Korean leader will happen on Tuesday, 9 a.m. local time. Some sources suggesting that if things go as planned, Kim Jong Un will leave Tuesday 2 p.m. from Singapore, and as of now, some sources also adding that President Trump could leave on Wednesday local time, but that would depend on the outcome of the summit as the doors of Air Force One now open, and we wait for President Trump to emerge. Kim Jong Un has already held his first meeting, a courtesy call on his host, the Singapore Prime Minister, which President Trump is also expected to meet the Singapore Prime Minister tomorrow. The two leaders are staying in two different hotels, the Shangri-La and the St. Regis in Singapore. And Kim Jong Un has already been quoted as saying that Singapore will go down in history if the summit is successful. That was the first quote that Kim Jong Un has given on Singaporean soil after he arrived. The motorcade just coming into Air Force One as preparations are on for President of the US to step off Air Force One and travel in that motorcade of his to the Shangri-La Hotel, where he is staying with his delegation. Ramesh Ramchandran is following those developments closely on the ground in Singapore and joining us now on the phone line. We're seeing pictures now, Ramesh, of Air Force One. The doors are open. We're expecting President Trump to get off soon, so we're going to see a repeat of those shots, I presume, of the motorcade that we saw with Kim Jong Un traveling earlier when he arrived in Singapore. Now it is President Trump's turn after he has landed there with his delegation. Ramesh?
Indeed, Amitabh, Donald Trump was supposed to land at 8:30 p.m. local time, and I think his plane landed on time as expected, on schedule. And this comes barely a day before he meets with Kim Jong Un on Tuesday morning for the summit meeting with the North Korean leader, when they will discuss, among other issues, the issue of nuclear weapons. So Donald Trump is flying in straight from the G7 summit in Canada, where he cut short the last few engagements to rush to Singapore, and that to my mind is unprecedented in every sense of the word. For a head of state to travel to a third country almost 36 hours before a summit meeting, to my mind is significant. How he'll spend tomorrow remains interesting. It'll be interesting to watch what he does tomorrow here in Singapore. Remember, there is no meeting, informal or otherwise, scheduled between any of the two principals, either Kim Jong Un or Donald Trump here in Singapore tomorrow. So they will have one full day to themselves, Amitabh, to prepare, to do their homework, prepare the ground, so to speak, interact with their officials. Remember, Trump is traveling with his close aides, including Chief of Staff John Kelly, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, National Security Advisor John Bolton. So he will be having discussions with him for the North Korean meeting, and they will thrash out differences and a minutiae of the summitry before he heads into that Tuesday morning meeting with Kim Jong Un. So clearly, all eyes are on Trump as he lands in Singapore for the Tuesday morning's meeting with Kim Jong Un.
Right. In fact, Ramesh, we're just seeing pictures of President Trump getting off Air Force One. He's being greeted by Singapore officials, I do presume U.S. officials as well. The Singapore foreign minister had met Kim Jong Un earlier, and he had initially tweeted that photograph of his. You're talking about preparations, homework. Is there any word on whether the two delegations or two leaders of, apart from the heads of state, will be meeting before the summit?
Well, I don't want to second guess two unpredictable politicians, Amitabh. So I won't hazard a guess on whether Trump will be meeting Kim Jong Un tomorrow informally or otherwise, possibly on the golf course that that straddles the Capella Hotel on Sentosa Island. But all gloves, all bets are off as a moment, because one can never be sure how Trump behaves in a certain manner. So that remains to be seen. But the fact is, there are no official meetings lined up for tomorrow between any of the delegations represented either on the North Korean side or on the American side. What we are given to understand is there will be bilateral courtesy call-ons between the Singapore government leadership and Donald Trump, given the fact that Singapore is the host country for the Trump-Kim summit. So there will be courtesy calls on the Singaporean leadership, including the Prime Minister, who, by the way, met with Kim Jong Un early this evening here in Singapore. So tomorrow's will be essentially a dry run, a rehearsal for the Tuesday morning summit. Remember, the summit meeting starts at 9 a.m. local time. That's pretty early by Singaporean standards. It's 6:30 a.m. in the morning India time. So all eyes will be focused on the Trump-Kim meeting. But that's a host of issues bedeviling U.S. relations with countries in the region and beyond. Most notably, his G7 summit appearance, where America was isolated on the world stage among the G7 countries, with Germany, Canada all saying and all casting aspersions on the leadership of Donald Trump on global issues.
Ramesh, President Trump's motorcade is now leaving the Air Force One jet, the Boeing jet, which has landed. We're seeing the motorcade leaving the airport as well. We saw earlier pictures of people along the streets of Singapore taking photographs, selfies, videos when Kim Jong Un's motorcade passed through. What is the anticipation like on the streets of Singapore?
Well, Amitabh, to be honest, Singaporeans are waiting with bated breath for the Trump-Kim meeting. There are a lot of stakes involved here for Singapore as well. Remember, Singapore is seen as a neutral country, a secure location for such a high-profile visit. So most Singaporeans we interacted with here this afternoon say that they're hoping for a positive outcome from the Trump-Kim summit, at least a way forward, at least a roadmap of peace on the Korean Peninsula, if not on Tuesday morning, at least in the next few weeks, months and years ahead, for a normalization of ties between the U.S. and North Korea. Remember, North Korea and the U.S. do not have diplomatic relations now for almost 7 decades now. So this is an unprecedented summit between Trump and Kim, the first by a sitting American president with any North Korean leader. So that, to my mind, is significant in itself, historic, a momentous occasion, no doubt, for both the U.S. and North Korea. But that said, the impression that one gets a sense talking to Singaporeans is that a lot rides on the personalities of these two leaders, Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un. Both are unpredictable politicians, unconventional, unorthodox, temperamental. So as Trump warned the other day, he says if talks do not go the way he likes it to, he may well walk out within a few minutes of him meeting Kim Jong Un. So we'll have to wait and watch as to how these two personalities actually, whether they're able to get together, have a working relationship going forward. Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un, two contrasting personalities. But that said, Amitabh, a study in contrast is also between the Air Force One and the aircraft which Kim Jong Un used to land in Singapore. Remember, a lot of speculation that he will use the Soviet-era vintage aircraft, the Ilyushin 62M, for his flight to Singapore, but he chose an Air China aircraft loaned by Chinese government to him, which ferried him from Pyongyang to Singapore and landed at the Changi airport here this afternoon, whereas Trump landed at the Air Force base, very close to the Changi airport. So clearly, it's a study in contrast as to how these two leaders will approach their summit meeting here on Tuesday morning.
You're talking about the contrast in the two aircrafts that the leaders arrived in. You also talked about the keen anticipation, not just in Singapore, but across the world. We're seeing a whole gaggle of reporters there at the airport. The motorcade with dozens of cars has already left there, Ramesh. The first quotes that came from Kim Jong Un after he arrived in Singapore were in reference to his hosts. He said Singapore would go down in history if the summit was a success. Now that "if" is a big word.
Indeed, one can see the rhetoric being toned down in the last few days leading up to the summit, Amitabh. Both sides being very cautious, very calibrated in their rhetoric, in their speeches, in their statements. No one really wants to preempt what these two leaders will discuss when they meet on Tuesday morning, but one can safely expect them to discuss a whole gamut of issues, bilateral, regional and global, when these two leaders meet, especially the issue of nuclear weapons. Now, as we've been reporting on WION, the US says, and has been consistently saying, that US wants North Korea to dismantle its nuclear weapons program here and now, immediately. Whereas Kim Jong Un says, while I am agreeing in principle to disarmament, I can do it in phases, in incrementally going forward. I will not do it immediately. I will not do it here and now. So that's the big difference in approaches between the US and North Korea. But that said, Trump, for his part, has backtracked on some of his statements in recent days. He has said recently in the US that he sees this meeting as a process, as a part of a process which will be set in motion when they meet here in Singapore on the Sentosa Island in Capella Hotel on Tuesday morning. And then they will decide on the way forward how best to bridge the differences, bridge the gap in perceptions going forward. And the expectation in Singapore is that Singapore, being a host country with a very secure location and a favorable environment for both leaders, that a positive outcome can be expected, if not a joint statement, at least a statement of intent from both sides after they meet on Tuesday morning.
Tell us a little bit more about the preparations. You're talking about the venue itself. It's a triangle island which is off the main Singapore island, and tell us more about the security preparations and the other preparations.
Indeed, Amitabh, as you can see behind me, I'm coming to you from the Marina Sands Bay area in Singapore City. This is the central commercial district of Singapore. It's a city-state, a very small state by area. It's about 700 square kilometers. If you rank in terms of area, it is 192nd smallest country in the world. So remember, this is also studied in contrast with India. India is the 8th largest country by area on the planet. So I'm coming to you from the Marina Sands Bay area, and the location of the hotels, Shangri-La for Trump and the St. Regis for Kim Jong Un, is not far from here. This adds in the Tangling area, which is a very high security area, a fortress literally, where bystanders, locals are being dissuaded by policemen in uniform as well as in civvies to not venture anywhere near those two hotels. This is a protected area with traffic restrictions in place from the 9th of June till the 14th of June, till after the leaders have left Singapore. So it's a big problem for many Singaporeans given the traffic restrictions that have put in place. Their movement is being affected, their everyday life, commute to work and back home is being affected. So there's a lot of unrest in Singapore as we speak. Not everybody is willing to speak out against the government or the summit. They say they're happy that Singapore is hosting the summit. At the same time, they would have hoped that traffic restrictions would have been a little more liberal for them to go about their daily commute much more easily. That said, the location of the summit itself, Amitabh, is the Capella Hotel on the Sentosa Island, about a 20 minutes drive from here where I'm at the moment. And that's an isolated area, a secluded area, and one which sort of is favorable for both leaders, both sides, because it is not in the central commercial district. It will not affect the populace as much, local It is slightly secluded from the main city area, and that, to my mind, could be a happy hunting ground for these two leaders as they try to size each other up and try to establish a working relationship going forward. That said, there is a golf course nearby, near the Capella Hotel, Amitabh, and who knows, Trump, being a keen golfer, might decide to spend some time on the golf course tomorrow morning, and he might have a Kim Jong Un drop by. So two unpredictable politicians, you never know how these two guys spend time tomorrow, the whole day tomorrow actually, before they meet on Tuesday morning.
What about preparations in the two hotels where the two leaders are staying? Are they setting up separate media conference rooms for the tons of media that is already present there? Or how is that progressing?
Well, Amitabh, tons of media persons might be an understatement. There are literally hordes, at least by conservative estimates, 3,000 plus journalists here in Singapore this evening as we speak, all housed up at various hotels at strategic locations near the Shangri-La and the St. Regis Hotel, where Kim Jong Un is staying, also near on Sentosa Island near the Capella Hotel. So Singapore is chock-a-block with journalists from all over the world. I saw a stream of journalists stationed outside the St. Regis Hotel early this evening, all waiting in anticipation to catch a glimpse of the reclusive North Korean leader as he drove in and out in his limousine to meet the Singaporean Prime Minister earlier today. So all eyes are, the world's focus is on Kim Jong Un and the Trump meeting. But that said, the hotels itself are a fortress, high security zone. Nobody's allowed to venture anywhere near that. And there are barricades put up at every vantage point, all roads leading up to the hotels.
Ramesh Ramachandran reporting live from Singapore after Donald Trump, the President of the United States, and his delegation has arrived on Air Force One for that summit that is scheduled for Tuesday. The two leaders are scheduled to meet at 9 a.m. local time on Tuesday to talk about ending North Korea's nuclear program and transforming the state, which has been under harsh international sanctions for its arms program. So after arriving in Singapore on Air Force One, President Trump's motorcade is now on its way to the Shangri-La Hotel, where he and his delegation will be staying. The North Korean leader is staying at a nearby hotel called the St. Regis. Both will be meeting on an island which is separate from the main Singaporean island and has been chosen specifically for that reason, that it can be to a certain extent cut off from normal traffic, which includes, as Ramesh Ramachandran, WION's report on the ground there in Singapore is pointing out, thousands of journalists who have arrived in Singapore. These are live pictures from just outside the Shangri-La Hotel, where President Trump should be arriving in a few minutes from now, a short journey from where Air Force One landed. A motorcade of dozens of cars and vehicles has been on the move from after President Trump landed in Singapore for about 10 minutes now. He is expected to meet his host, the Singapore Prime Minister, tomorrow, and the summit is scheduled for Tuesday, 9 a.m. Local time. Kim Jong Un, who arrived earlier in the day in Singapore on board an Air China special Boeing flight, which is usually used only by top Chinese leaders, has already met his host, the Singapore Prime Minister. He has been quoted as saying that Singapore will go down in history if the summit is a success. President Trump left the G7 summit early from Canada late last night, India time. He wasn't there for the last few meetings, and a joint communique that was issued. He's arrived more than 30 hours ahead of the scheduled summit between him and the North Korean leader, the first ever between a North Korean leader and a sitting US president, that will take place in Singapore on Saturday morning local time. America has been pushing North Korea for a complete and a verifiable nuclear disarmament, whereas though the North Korean leader had said that he is willing to discuss that, he wants denuclearization on the complete Korean peninsula.
It's absolutely massive. That's here. This is what he's going to be driving.